is soft, turn the key and cooler on. Push the pause for relief. Free pass, you don't even have to ask to be the cat in the sun. Someday I will see the whole deal through. Today I've got better things to do. Okay, to leave a little bit undone and be the cat in the sun. Be the cat in the sun. Set aside every empty spreadsheet line and loosen up on the grind. Simmer down, settle back and mess around. Be the cat in the sun. Someday I will see the whole deal through. Today I've got better things to do. Okay, to leave a little bit undone.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. So in the previous episode, I went ahead and got a jump start on Russ's hot part setup and then ran into an issue with the Wastegate outlet flanges. Now, Russ has already modified those flanges. They are on their way back here right now, but at the end of last episode, I took the initiative since I couldn't work on the hot part setup anymore, and I got to work on his cold side intercooler tube. And the intro montage for this video was doing all of the welding for it. So this is what we've ended up with. And this will end up being anodized, so this raw titanium color that it is right now will not be around forever. But at least for right now, this is what we're left with. And after all of the welding and the whole pie cut section, the tube dropped right back into place. No movement, no anything crazy, and we are good to go with it. So that tube is completed minus one outstanding item, and that is this right here, this 8th NBT bung that Russ will use for his IAT sensor. So he asked me to kind of hide this bung so it will sit somewhere on the back side of the tube here. I just need to figure out where that is and then punch a hole in the tube and weld the bung on. So let's go ahead and get to that so that way I can say definitively that this cold side tube is completed. And that will be another item checked off of the list of things to do for this car. Before I sit down and begin welding this bung in place, I have a little tech tip for you guys. So when you are back purging, the intent of purging is to shove atmospheric air out from the inside of the piece that you are welding. This prevents weird oxidation and corrosion and things like that from happening. And when you are working with small bungs like this 8th NBT bung, that can be kind of difficult. So rather than trying to plug this bung up or do anything along those lines, what I'll do is just leave it open. And this can be a secondary vent to shove more air out of it. And obviously I have my purge plug on this side that is venting air and argon out as well. So rather than trying to plug this up with foil and potentially melting aluminum foil into the bung and having to figure out a way to cut it off and reestablish a nice surface finish and everything else, I just leave it open, let it be a secondary vent port, and all is well that way. Just like that, Russ's 8th NPT bung is located on his intercooler tube. So I placed it right there, which you guys can hopefully see. Let me zoom in a little bit actually. So I placed it right there, and that's in a nice advantageous location for his harness, wherever it's going to run to. It keeps it away from the belt and everything else, and from the front side, you can't even see it. So, as far as I can tell, I think I checked all of the boxes that he was after with that bung location. And now that cold set intercooler tube is completed and ready to be anodized. So, I'm not going to make any other progress on the car today, as I'm going to wait until the wastegate outlet flanges come back in, or when they arrive here again, I should say. And at that point, I can actually go ahead and knock out the wastegate recirculations, get that portion of the project squared away, and then can move on to the hot side intercooler tube, the intake tube, and the other few ancillary items to wrap this project up. Starting today off with good news, the wastegate outlet flanges for Russ's car are now modified, and they now work with the clamps and the wastegates that he's using. So you can see now how much thinner that tapered mounting shoulder is on, I guess, this flange and this one. Both of them Russ did a great job of machining them and getting them down to the tolerance and spec that we needed. So if I take one of the modified Tycon outlet flanges, place it on the wastegate, and if I can do this with my non-dominant hand, there. You can see that it seats the whole way in on the clamp. I can fold the clamp up. We're good to go with the gap or the distance between both sides of the clamp here. And the most important part, our bolt goes right through. So by the time that everything is tightened down and all of that, there will be no issues. This will work perfectly. And most importantly, now I can begin on the wastegate recirculations. So out of the 2 wastegate recirculations that I have to do on Russ's setup, I'm going to start with the top one, or the rearmost wastegate on the manifold itself. So that is this one right here. And the reason I start with this one is it is integral, or it will be integral to the downpipe, and it is the more difficult and the more technical of the 2 wastegate provisions to accomplish. So what I am doing is taking this 1 3/4 90-degree mandrel elbow, and first I will weld the tube to the flange itself, and then start coping and fitting and rotating this 90 until it blends well along the side of the downpipe here. So I've done these a number of times before, and I believe that I've actually shown this process on the channel in the past, but it's been a little while, so we'll go through and show kind of the step-by-step of it. So the first step of doing a wastegate recirculation like this is to weld the wastegate provision together. Now, this may seem kind of backwards, as if I have it welded and something doesn't fit right, well, how do I rectify that? Well, you kind of just have to do your due diligence as you are actually building the provision to avoid having to cut things apart and re-weld and redo things. So I like to weld these provisions before I start fitting them, so that way any movement at the flange or anything like that is already accounted for, and it would be quite irritating to do all of the coping and all of the fitting with what would be the outlet side of this piece, and then weld this flange and have things move, and all of the tedious coping and fitment work that you've done so far is all for nothing essentially, as you'll have to end up sitting there and retailoring and hoping that things will still fit. So I like to weld first, fit second, and I take my time and don't rush any portions of it, and just make sure that I get my fitment for the coped wastegate recirc provision as tight as it can possibly be on the side of the downpipe here before I cut my hole or do anything else like that. Now that this wastegate provision is welded, at least the bend to the flange, the next thing that needs to happen is all of the coping and making this bend blend pretty seamlessly into the side of the downpipe. So this ends up being a tedious and time-consuming process, a lot of grinding, a lot of fitting, walking back and forth from the fab room to the welding room, so on and so forth. So rather than taking up a bunch of the video with that process, let's do some YouTube magic. So here is what we have now, and boom, there we are. So after a bit of coping and fitting and all of that, the wastegate recirc is now ready for its hole to be punched in the downpipe and then welding to begin. So again, when you're doing any fitment like this, it's very important to take little bites as opposed to giant chomps out of the grinding and fitting that you are doing. It takes much longer, obviously, but if you kind of dance the part into place and do just little bits here and there, you can be much more precise with your fitment than if you took a giant cut out of it and then you'll have a piece that may not end up fitting. So another point, just for the mark out portion of this, these extended tip markers are extremely handy for getting kind of up in tight confines, like up in this area, to mark it out. So I give a shout out to my buddy Ryan Jackson for putting me onto these. This is the first time that I've had the opportunity to use one, and I've had these sitting around for probably a month or two at this point. And using that as opposed to my good old Milwaukee markers was a much better option. So at this point, I can go ahead and pull that off. I can cut this hole into the downpipe. I can prep the inside of this, get it deburred and all of that. And then at that point, it's welding time. Russ's first wastegate recirculation is completed. So it came out pretty nicely. Everything still fits well. Everything looks good. And when I do recirc provisions like this, I will do two weld passes, where the small tube enters the large tube. Now I do this for two reasons. Reason one being for better aesthetics, as once you get a root pass established, it's easier to come through and do a cap pass or a cover pass, where you're paying more attention to aesthetics as opposed to the root pass, where you're just trying to get material down and get everything together that way. And the second portion of it, or the second reason for it, is you can apply much more heat and do the weld much hotter once you already have that root established, so you can end up with better penetration that way as well. So this is all squared away, and the downpipe is good to go, at least at this moment, although there are still a few things to do to it. But I'm going to shift my focus to the manifold, and I think somewhere on this rear secondary, I am going to put a number 4 bung, as Russ requested that I do so, or put some sort of apparatus in place so he can connect for a back pressure sensor. So I have a number 4 stainless weld bung in stock, so I'll get that, figure out the location for it, punch a hole, weld it, so on and so forth. That'll be squared away, and then the manifold can go back in the car for good at that point. We're going to finish this video off with a couple of smaller projects on Russ's car before we get to the rest of the engine bay fab and the mid pipe. So the first of the 2 projects that we're going to work on today is this little guy right here. And what this is kind of a muffler damper type thing for Russ's map sensor. Now, he was recommended to use one of these by one of the tuners that they work with up at Accelerated. And from what I can tell, it is just kind of a hollow baffle muffler type thing. I may be wrong. There may be some more intricate nuances to the design, but it's something that Russ turned himself on his lathe. And like everything else on this project, this is a piece of titanium. So right where my index finger is, if you see that dividing line, that is a seam between this top cap and this lower body, and that seam needs to be welded up. So I needed to figure out a way to back purge this, and I came up with this little ghetto rigged apparatus, which is just a number 4 straight hose end, a piece of hose, and then one of my quick disconnect purge fittings that I jammed in there. So this should work out pretty well to get gas flowing through this piece. And all I have to do is that one weld. Russ's little map sensor, baffle, muffler deal, whatever it is, the little expansion chamber is completed. And this was a tricky little weld to do to try to keep color out of it. But as you guys can see as I rotate this around, was able to keep the weld nice, crystal clear silver with maybe a little bit of straw in it, which is exactly what you're looking for with titanium. And being that it is something that will seed whatever manifold pressure that the car sees, and that could be 40 or 50 psi, I went ahead and used filler rod for it, back purged it, did the whole 9 yards the way I normally do any titanium welding, and this thing should be very solid for him and not cause him any issues or any grief. So just like the rest of the titanium components that we are using on Russ's car, I sourced the O2 bung and the O2 bung brace plate through Tycon. And here are what we are using, or here are those 2 materials. So on the right is the O2 bung itself. This is a heatsink O2 bung. You can see how it has these ribs machined into it. And the idea behind these is to act as a bit of a heatsink, similarly to an air-cooled motorcycle engine or an old Porsche or Volkswagen, something along those lines. The idea with the ribs is to increase the surface area of the outside of the bung and therefore increase that amount of surface area for heat exchanging to happen between the heat of the O2 bung and the atmosphere around it. Now the brace plate is as the name entails, it's a brace or a reinforcement plate. And the O2 bung will sit inside of this. I will form the brace plate to the contour of the tube. And the idea with it is rather than just having the circumference of the O2 bung being the mating surface or the only weld that's holding the bung on the tube, the only surface area rather, with this brace plate, we drastically increase that surface area and that footprint. So with any vibrations or anything along those lines, they aren't acting just on the bung itself, it's acting on the whole footprint of this brace plate as the plate gets welded to the tube and to the bung, therefore decreasing the likelihood that you'll have a tubing rupture or failure due to any vibrations or the bung cracking off. So I really like using these heatsink O2 bungs and these brace plates. I think it's a clean look and it's a way to keep everything very strong, and you guys know I am a stickler for that. And I also went ahead and pulled out my old mock-up O2 sensor. I use this just to figure out locations of bungs, as rather than kind of guessing and hoping that an O2 bung will fit, it's better just to have an old sensor, and that way there is no guesswork. You can figure out exactly where the sensor is going to protrude out of the bung and out of the downpipe, and it'll make your life easier and your customer happier if there is no guesswork that way, and you do it right once and everything fits and everything's good. So now we need to determine the O2 bung location. And there are a few considerations that we need to take into account with this setup right here, right now. So the first of which is heat. And obviously the exhaust gas is going to be hot, but there is a difference between what's coming out of the wastegate and what's coming out of the turbine outlet. The turbine housing and the turbo itself will work to scrub some of the heat off of the exhaust that's traveling through the downpipe, as opposed to the wastegate that is pre-turbine, having the ability to be cooled by the turbo itself. So what's coming out of the wastegate will be much hotter. So we don't want to place the O2 sensor downstream of the wastegate recirculation. And you'd just be more likely to cook the sensor, and that just ends up being a pain. So we don't really have to worry about that here due to there not being space anywhere down here after this wastegate recirculation to place the sensor. But we also don't want to place it too closely to the turbine outlet for that same reason. So the happy medium for this appears to be kind of somewhere in this area on the outside of this, I guess would be the second bend. And what I'll do is take our O2 bung, take our sensor, and kind of hold them in place, move things around until I find a location that I'm happy with. Now the other consideration, or the other request that Rust made, I guess would be the right way to phrase it, is to kind of direct the sensor so the pigtail for it travels over into this corner, as that is where the engine harness bulkhead comes through the firewall and where the bundle of engine harness wires will be located. So there will be a connector for an O2 sensor there, and if I kind of direct this, or at least make it such that this connector can reach over here, that will make his life much easier for hooking things up and servicing this car later on. So taking those things into account, and if I kind of move around here, find our happy medium, I guess something like that right there isn't too bad. If I move it up a little bit, what does that do? Doesn't really make a difference, but it gains us a little bit of distance to the wastegate recirc, so we'll go with that right there. So from here, and I'll have to do this with my non-dominant hand, but it's just a matter of taking a permanent marker, coming on the inside of the bung, going around in a circle, and there we go. Now the O2 bung location is marked out. I can go ahead and pull the downpipe back out of this car, and get to drilling the hole and getting this ready for the O2 bung to go in place. Russ's O2 bung and O2 bung brace are now installed on his downpipe. So here's the end result, and you can see just how much more surface area the brace provides the bung and how much more support that it provides for it. So this is all good to go, and everything on the top side of the downpipe is squared away at this point. The only thing that is outstanding at this point in time is the lower recirculation provision, which we won't get into in this episode. That will be in next episode. So now I can go ahead, reinstall the downpipe, as I'll need to have it in place to figure out how I'm going to run that front recirculation tube and get all that taken care of again in the next episode. And there we have the finished product of Russ's O2 bung and upper wastegate recirculation. Two big items knocked off the list for this thing, and two less things that are still outstanding for the rest of the project. So, like we said before, the O2 sensor is in a good location to plug into the harness. It also isn't placed in a position where it will be likely to be destroyed by excessive heat, and it also sits on the outside of this bend, so it will get a better sensor reading there as opposed to if it was on the inside of a bend or in another position or such as that. So with those things knocked out and some big progress made in this episode, I think that will be about the end of this one. So we're chugging right along with all the titanium work on this, and this setup is really starting to come together. Now, we have everything done on the cold side, and we have some progress made on the hot side, although there's still certainly more to go on the hot side, both on the air side and the exhaust side. But we'll take care of that in the next episode, and I can't wait to get going on the remaining projects. But that will be then, and this is now, and we are done with this episode at this point. So thank you guys, as always, for tuning in, for coming on all these different adventures and all these different journeys with me. And we overcame a little bit of adversity in this episode with the wastegate outlet flanges, but thanks to Russ's machining abilities, we are squared away on that front, and we are good to go to continue building from here. So I hope you guys are enjoying the RSP Supra build series. I know I'm certainly enjoying working on it, and like I've said at the end of, I think, almost every episode in this build series, I'm very thankful to Russ for giving me the opportunity to work on this car. But without me droning on anymore, that will be the end of this episode. So as always, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, check out the website for manifolds, for merch, for all things good that way, and I will see you all in the next episode.